So, I'm obviously late to this trend, but I saw it, and dang it if I'm not going to take the opportunity to spread the amazingness of Arkham further. For those unaware, this is the third year of Nando v Movies doing a giant collaboration of content creators talking about their favorite scenes from movies, TV shows, video games, what have you. First, there was one marvelous scene, then one excellent scene, and now one villainous scene. Obviously pretty excluding to DC until now, but hey, I'm not the one behind this project, am I? If you want all the other details, check out the original video behind this where Nando breaks down one of the best scenes from Avengers Infinity War. So, g'day chaps, 'tis I, ClownPuncher139. The Batman media we consume has so many villains that finding just one that stands out is dang near impossible. And even taking time to focus on Arkham specifically doesn't make narrowing down much easier. There are so many villains cranked into these games that I'm tempted to say there are more than all the movies combined. Seriously though, who the heck am I to choose? The Joker with his infinite number of show-stopping scenes? Two-Face with his remorseful speech to Batman at the end of Night? Penguin just being a slimy bastard throughout all the games? Hugo Strange confidently standing up to Batman as he's confronted in City? Scarecrow's speech to Gordon on top of the rooftop in Night? Bane's confrontation on the Gotham Royal in Origins? There are just too many to pick. Well, I would obviously do a Joker moment if not for the fact that everyone always talks about Joker in every piece of Batman media. So, for the sheer fact I wanted to be original, I didn't want to do Joker. Instead, I'm looking at a villain almost always pushed to the sidelines, but who was always given the most love in every single appearance. One villain who really isn't much of a villain to begin with. The one, the only, the ice-cold Mr. Freeze. I think all of us Arkham experts can agree that Freeze's story in the saga is one of the most well-written and emotional parts of these games. The writers definitely mess up from time to time, but one thing they always did expertly is Mr. Freeze. From his first appearance as a reluctant boss in Arkham City to his somber goodbye in Arkham Knight, Freeze is a character you always love to see, especially since he usually plays the role of an ally. Well, except the one time he wasn't. Cold Heart is a DLC story for Batman Arkham Origins, and is basically just the origin story of Mr. Freeze. If you've read the comics or watched the animated series, you most certainly know this story. But for people like me who had never seen it play out, it was something truly incredible. If you haven't played Arkham Origins or Cold Heart, I highly recommend you do so before continuing through this video. The particular scene I'm looking at takes place at the end of the story, so before we get to it, I'll summarize the story events to get you a better idea of what we're looking at. On New Year's Eve, Bruce Wayne is hosting a grand party in celebration of Ferris Boyle, an up-and-coming entrepreneur and philanthropist and owner of GothCorp. As Ferris finishes his acceptance speech and midnight approaches, a large explosion sends guests flying and leaves a giant ice formation behind. Armed goons enter the hall and subdue the guests, and they're followed by a man in a mechanized suit. He smacks one of the guests away and freezes him midair with a beam of ice, then demands to be brought Ferris Boyle. He's later revealed by the thugs to only be known as Mr. Freeze. Bruce leaves to don the batsuit, but Freeze is able to get Ferris and escape in a helicopter. He freezes Batman solid, not killing him, and says,
"I have no quarrel with you."
As Batman leaves the manor to chase after Freeze, he says to Alfred,
"I'll see this one wheeled into Blackgate on a gurney."
So only a few minutes in, and Mr. Freeze has crashed a party at Wayne Manor, endangered the lives of many civilians, and specifically kidnapped Ferris Boyle, known to the public as the next big philanthropist trying to make Gotham a better place. To the uninitiated in Batman lore, this just seems like another crazed madman out for either blood or money. At this point, you agree with Batman. Targeting someone like Ferris, who's been trying to make Gotham a better place for everyone, is sickening. Someone who does that does not deserve to walk into prison. Sometime later, Batman tracks Freeze to the cryogenics research lab in GothCorp, the same company Boyle owns, and the Penguin is with him with a bunch of goons. In exchange for advanced cryogenic weapons from Freeze, Penguin supplied his goons to help him. However, their deal seems to have gone awry. Penguin believes Freeze has been holding out on him, that he needs Ferris to access a super cryo weapon behind the doors. Freeze states that this isn't the case, and that the contents of the room are of no concern to Penguin. Batman drops in to save Boyle and stop Freeze, but only ends up distracting Penguin long enough for Freeze to encase him in ice and take Boyle again. He violently rips Boyle out of the ice, and Batman gives him one chance to let him go. He points the ice gun at Boyle and says,
"Threats are meaningless to a man who has lost everything."
Freeze then shoots a tank full of cryo vapor that creates an impassable wall of ice. Things are starting to be revealed now. Freeze is after something that Penguin wouldn't even have cared for, so his goals are not monetary or bloodlust, or else he would have just killed Ferris on the spot. He claims to have lost everything to Batman, but we still don't know what that is or why he needs Ferris to begin with. All we know is that he needs Ferris for something behind those doors, and it's not something valuable to all. After a long side quest to break through the wall of ice, Batman begins to uncover the mystery of why Freeze is doing this. And honestly, I think I'll just let the detective speak for himself.
Odd. Freeze was secretly doing research on Huntington's Korea, but this is a cryogenic weapons lab. The test subject was Nora Freeze. Now I know what happened here. Boyle hired Victor to help advance the secret cryoweapons program within GothCorp. In exchange, Boyle agreed to devote GothCorp resources to finding a cure for Nora's Huntington's. But Boyle was more interested in how Victor had managed to put Nora into cryostasis. When Victor realized that Boyle had no intention of following through on their deal, he decided to do the Huntington's research himself. But Boyle didn't like that. The cryochemical cocktail altered Victor's metabolism, as well as the guards. Boyle escaped ahead of the plume and had the lab quarantined. Victor survived, but he knew that leaving the supercooled lab would kill him. So he built himself a suit and utilized an organic supercoolant to keep his core temperature sub-zero. All this violence. He's just trying to save his dying wife.
You heard him. Freeze is just trying to save his dying wife. Boyle tried to prevent him from doing so, but that only made Victor angrier. He took everything from Victor. He only took Boyle to save his wife and get revenge. And that leads to the one villainous scene. Batman approaches Freeze and asks him to stop. Unlike their first encounter, he doesn't approach with violence. He puts his hands out to his side as a semi-surrendering pose to show he means Victor no harm. Batman says Boyle will face justice, which makes him cry out that it was an accident, only making Freeze more angry. He rips Boyle out of the ice once again and throws him into a cryo chamber before trying to freeze Batman again. And we get the titular line of this video.
Nothing matters. Do you understand? Nothing but my Nora!
Batman tries appealing to what little humanity Victor has left by saying Nora wouldn't have wanted to see him turn into this. He's endangered lives all over the city just to get her back. That's not something Nora would have wanted. Victor pulls a non sequitur and instead tells Batman what Nora did want. A long life in the warmth of the sun, her hand in Victor's. But Boyle ripped that chance away from them. He attacked Freeze and tried stopping his research. He caused Freeze to be covered in cryovapor, forcing him into a mechanical suit and sub-zero temperatures for the rest of his days. He refused to give Freeze the codes to save his wife. Boyle is the true monster of this story.
Because of him, she'll only feel the icy touch of a man whose emotions run as cold as the blood in his veins.
This might be my favorite interaction in the entire Arkham saga. Batman doesn't approach with violence, as I said, but Freeze has become so enraged at this point that he attacks Batman anyway. Even though Batman approaches Victor with sympathy, saying he'll help him put Boyle on trial, that doesn't matter to him anymore. He wants Boyle to suffer for turning him into this monster, but right now, nothing matters to him except Nora. Freeze doesn't care how far he falls from his original self at this point. He's caused mass destruction, put dangerous weapons on the streets, and endangered the lives of hundreds because of how much he loves Nora. Nora wouldn't want to see him like this, but it doesn't matter to Freeze. All that matters is saving her. Freeze only wanted to live a long life with Nora. He wanted to bask in the sun, holding her hand, being happy together. But Boyle has prevented that, and now Freeze is broken. He can't live the life Nora would have wanted them to live. He's become an emotionless husk of himself. A husk that doesn't see someone trying to help him standing right in front of him. As Batman tries talking Freeze down, Freeze calls in a bunch of goons to find and kill him. Even as Batman offers help, Freeze only sees him as an interference. Furthermore, during the subsequent fight with Freeze, he says,
If Boyle had honored our bargain, none of this violence would have been necessary. You should be helping me, Batman, not fighting me.
So, Freeze is saying exactly what Batman already knows and had acknowledged earlier. Now, you could just call this a lazy way for the designers to work a fight into the story. However, I think it's more than that. Freeze has become so cold and disillusioned with reality at this point that he doesn't even realize someone is trying to help. He floods the room with cryovapor to freeze the air in his lungs. He actively hunts him down, freezing the goons he's hired solid, then smacking them out like they're nothing. It isn't until Nora is in danger that his senses come back to him. After wearing Freeze down, Nora's cryochamber has a critical error, putting her in danger. Even after dedicating so much time and effort to hunting Batman, Freeze's prime directive is smacked back into him. He could have spent all this time and energy into getting Nora out of there, but instead hunted a man who only wanted to help him. When that alarm goes off, Freeze drops everything and runs to save Nora, showing that his emotions are still somewhat intact. While trying to save her, he says,
Kill him and the Bat.
Batman is able to take Freeze down just as he says.
Hang on, Nora. I've almost got you.
He pulls him through the fort, then throws him through a wall, and one more punch is able to knock him down. Boyle was able to get out of the chamber Freeze locked him in, and tries to shoot Batman and Freeze with a stream of cryovapor. Batman pushes Freeze out of the way, but ends up getting frozen himself. Boyle comes down to their level, taunting Freeze the whole way, saying the police will never look his way after what Freeze did tonight. Even with this taunting, Freeze reaches out his hand and painfully says,
Nora.
even while the man who caused all this pain is taunting him, Nora is still the thing keeping him going. He even begs Boyle to try and save her.
Please, you can save her. You just have...
He's so desperate that he's begging the monster behind this mess to stop it. Boyle doesn't care. He rips off a piece of Freeze's suit and begins beating him to death with it. He says,
Victor, she died. I'll keep you alive long enough to see her go.
and now the tables have completely turned. You go from whittling down Freeze's health by yourself to actively trying to stop it from reaching zero. This was a genius move on the developers' parts, as within 5 seconds, Freeze goes from the enemy to the ally we know him as. This whole scene shows there's still a shred of humanity left in Freeze. After all the fighting, all the hatred for Boyle, and all the terrible things that went down, he still just wants to see Nora safe. When he said the title line earlier, he was still filled with rage for everyone going against him that night. Rage for Boyle for causing this. Rage against Batman for trying to help Boyle earlier in the night. Rage against Penguin for trying to betray him over simple weapons. Now he's filled with desperation. His rage has subsided, and he just wants to save Nora. Furthermore, it shows just how terrible Boyle really is. He sees a man on the brink of death trying to save the one thing he loves, being begged for help. Boyle doesn't even flinch at the opportunity, and instead goes right to beating Freeze to death, and taunting that he'll see the only one loved pass on. Batman doesn't even hesitate in helping Freeze take Boyle down and save Nora. As Batman restores some energy to Freeze's suit, all he can do is look at his frozen wife and reach out his hand. The night is finally over. Cold Cold Heart is probably the greatest piece of DLC from the Arkham saga. For those unfamiliar with Mr. Freeze's story, it paints a perfect picture of his character and how he became the anti-hero we all love. It starts pretty bleak, with Freeze supposedly just being another run-of-the-mill bad guy with a fun gimmick for Batman to take down. But it becomes a tragic tale of a man driven to the edge and almost becoming the very thing he wanted to destroy. All Mr. Freeze wanted was to save his dying wife, and he uses that as an excuse for all his actions. Ferris Boyle just wanted cryogenic weapons out of Freeze, and he used that as an excuse to kidnap his wife and cut funding to find the cure for her disease. Freeze resorted to violence when he didn't get what he wanted, and so did Boyle. They both become irrational thinkers who don't understand the gravity of the situations they're going against. Boyle tried to kill Freeze, trying to come up with a cure for a seemingly incurable disease that would help millions. Freeze tried to kill Batman, trying to help bring Boyle to justice. However, unlike Boyle, Freeze still has humanity in him. Despite his claim that his emotions have run colder than the blood in his veins, they're all still there. The second Nora is in danger, he runs to her aid. After being beaten senseless and taunted by the one who caused all this, he only reaches out for Nora. When all hope is seemingly lost, he begs the man who tried to kill him to save his wife. It is one of the most heartbreaking moments in this story, seeing Freeze beg Boyle to save Nora. You know he won't do it, but seeing the spark of humanity left in Freeze makes you think there might be some in Boyle too, and he might try to save her. But he doesn't. Boyle has no humanity left in him. He beats Freeze nearly to death, and it makes it all the more satisfying to watch Batman beat him down. And the final shot of Freeze reaching out to the restored Nora is the final nail in the coffin, setting the two apart. Freeze truly only cares about Nora. Boyle was just beating him to death, and Batman just saved him despite their earlier fight. All those thoughts going through his head, but his only word in the situation is Nora. Nothing else matters to him. Nothing but his Nora.